Okay, does everybody have an agenda? Okay, we're a little bit behind, but we'll try to work on through and get done. Instead of 9 o'clock, we'll try to get done by 9:10. How's that? I'm Sherry Munter. I'm your facilitator for tonight's meeting. And if you'll notice on the agenda that the purpose of the meeting is to focus on the staff and consultants will present their findings and unveil the first stage of the design plan. And we're going to learn about historical and cultural findings and discuss options for integration and view the master site plan as it progresses to the design details. So are you all here for the right meeting? You're not here for a wedding or anything? Okay. I'd like to encourage you to work under a climate of cooperation tonight. And I don't think we need to have any problem with that, but just in case, I've got a chart over here on the wall for the climate. This is a suggested one, and to listen and speak with respect and to stay open-minded and be productive with our time. And as your facilitator, it's my job to keep you on time and keep things rolling along. And everyone will have an opportunity to participate and either in the discussions or written comment. And if you'll notice on the back of the agenda, there's a written comment portion. If you don't happen to get heard tonight, what your concerns are, you can jot it down in there and we'll be sure that it gets in the meeting summary. And then to enjoy the process. So any questions or concerns about the climate? Can you all live with that? Do we need to add anything else? Okay. That's what climate that we'll operate under then. Over here on this chart I have a bin bam, and the purpose for that is if something comes up in tonight's discussion that doesn't really fit the topic of the meeting, we don't want to lose it, and so I'll put it over there in the bin. And the bam part is if somebody's just bitching and moaning and won't let it go, I'll stick it over there too, and maybe we can decide what to do with it at the end of the meeting. So that's the purpose of that. So if you have other issues that don't really pertain to the agenda, but you just want to get out there, we'll capture it over here. Okay. Donna is going to talk a little bit about the decision-making process, and my role as your facilitator is just to keep you moving forward and make sure that we get out of here on time and that we're productive with our meeting. So next on the agenda then is Donna.
Thanks, Sherry. I want to thank each of you for attending tonight. I know it's an absolutely gorgeous evening, and so I think we're a little bit victim of a beautiful night, because to talk about parks when it's gorgeous to be in them, we find that we don't get great numbers on those particular evenings. As far as decision making, we'll talk about that a little bit through the evening, but all of the public process to date has been critical to each step in the decision making. And tonight you're going to have an opportunity to not only learn about the cultural resources that Dan Hall of Western Cultural was able to uncover through his research and his team's research, but you're also going to learn how we're taking the master site plan that was adopted and turning that into what will become a working document to move forward. So that's sort of the overall goal for the evening. I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm Donna Gach, I'm the Director of Missoula Parks and Recreation, and I've been involved in this project for quite some time, in at least 7 years, and as we go through that history, we'll share more of that with you. And I wanted Dan Hall, if you'd wave your arm or stand up, he's with Western Cultural, and I wanted to thank Dan because he's been working with me and advising me, and today I explained that I think I've earned a graduate degree in, or at least getting there, maybe 101 at least, in history and preservation and cultural resources, and it's been a really great learning experience. Over here we have Bill Newman and Mark Wilcox with DHM Design out of the Denver area. We went through an extensive selection process and really believe that we've found top-notch park designers, and part of their team is WGM from here in Missoula, Brett Campbell and Janet Grove, and I want to thank all of them. In the audience we have some members of our historic stakeholders group, we have members of our Friends of Missoula Parks group, we've got folks from the neighborhoods and users, and we'll all get to know each other as the evening goes on. In an effort to try and catch up, I'm going to move ahead. This is an aerial of the greater area, and I'm going to help get you set on the site. And the first thing I'm going to explain is on the far right, you'll see it's Russell Street is actually Reserve Street. We were trying to compact the city when we labeled this. But that should be Reserve Street. And South Avenue, everybody's familiar with, Macaulay Butte. And the focus of this project is really the 82-acre parcel, or it's 82.7 acres, that we're talking about this evening. It's the part of the project that we've had the cultural resources work on, and it's also the part of the project that we're focused on design development right now. The really neat thing about Fort Missoula Regional Park is that it will ultimately end up in over 246 acres of parkland adjacent to all the Fort Missoula Historic District and the university land. So our community really has an amazing treasure that I can't help believe 100 and 200 years from now, citizens are going to look back and just be astounded by the vision of the citizens of this community. A little bit about land ownership. Fort Missoula is a unique place and a complicated place because of the land ownership of so many different government agencies, from city to county to federal, nonprofit, and everything else in between. And so it takes a lot of public process and a lot of input and engagement to move any project forward. And one group in particular that I didn't mention yet, but it's Northern Rockies Heritage Center, who is hosting our meeting tonight. They're a significant piece of this puzzle because of historic Fort Missoula, and I wanted to particularly thank them for hosting us tonight. When I talked about the 246 acres, this is the master site plan that was adopted by the City Park Board, the County Park Board, the City Council, and the Board of County Commissioners in 2001 and 2002. And you'll see that the far west parcel there with the pond is currently the Knife River gravel site. That property gets turned over to the city on December 31st, 2012. And the goals with that would be to create access to the Bitterroot River for recreational purposes. We also hope that we'll be able to create some natural habitat for birding. And then the northern part, because it's two ponds, could one day serve as a marina or a small lake, if you will, for our residents for fishing, non-motorized boating, canoeing, kayaking, and those kinds of things. So when you look at all of that and you put it in the historic context, which you'll all be experts on when Dan gets done, it's a very, very amazing place. In 1995, the city and county adopted the Urban Area Open Space Plan, which led to the 1995 bond, which was passed, $5 million. And one of the parcels mentioned in that bond was acquisition of additional property in the area of Fort Missoula for athletic playing fields. So I guess that speaks to have a vision, and the project will follow. In 1998, the city was successful in negotiations with the university and purchased 98 acres. And that includes the 82.7 acres we're talking about today, and then the triangle piece that's immediately west of Larchmont Golf Course. And just a little bit of trivia, in that year, we purchased the land for $7,000 an acre, to give you an idea how things have changed. 2001, and actually it was almost a 2-year planning process. We had applications for a working group that met numerous times with a facilitator and a design team and came up with the master site plan that you saw, and eventually took it through approval by the City Council and County Commissioners and the 2 park boards. Also in the fall of 2002, JTL Incorporated, which is now Knife River, dedicated 84 acres to the City of Missoula to become that marina and water feature, and also to provide access to the river. And again, that happens in 2012. They also created the bowls that the athletic facilities will go in, and when Bill and Mark have their presentation, that'll make a lot more sense, but that was part of the working group's vision, is that we retain the view sheds of the historic fort. In 2002, there was a ballot issue. It was a mill levy to start Phase 1 construction of the park and also to provide maintenance funds for the park. It failed miserably countywide. It was a countywide ballot, but citywide, in the city precincts, it failed by somewhere between 100 and 150 votes. 2002 to present, we've really been spending the bulk of that time working with Dan and Philip McLean and the stakeholders at the fort, the State Historic Preservation Office, in doing a lot of research to understand the history and cultural resources at this site. In 2004, the Master Parks for the Parks and Recreation Plan for Greater Missoula area was adopted after another year-long public process that was led by another citizens working group, and it re-emphasized the importance of Fort Missoula Regional Park for our community. In 2007, the Friends of Fort Missoula Regional Park, which is a consortium of park users and stakeholders, reconvened. So there was a group that was meeting during the planning process early on. Another group came together. Some of those folks are here today, and they've been extremely instrumental in bringing this project to this point to you today. And I can't thank them enough for that. And Richard, John, and Russ are all here tonight. The city hired our professional design team, who I've already introduced. And the Friends of Fort Missoula Regional Park did convene, or held a survey to determine support for a mill levy. And they were focused on this 82.7 acre parcel. And really interesting information. What most of our polling is telling us, and the polls that I'm talking about are the 2003 public opinion survey that we hosted, and then again this one that was hosted by Friends of Missoula Parks, is we generally find that about 90% to 96% of the population is satisfied or very happy with their park system. When we ask them if they want more and are willing to pay for that through tax dollars, this is the kinds of numbers we're getting, somewhere between 60 and 70%. In the case of Fort Missoula, 68% of those polled said they would accept an increase in property taxes in order to see development at the fort. And this was based on a $8 million question. And I just find that astounding. It's very similar to the 2006 open space bond, passed by about the same margin, following the same polling. So Missoula definitely loves its parks, open spaces, and trails, and we thank you for that. Currently, you're all here today to hear about the historic resources. And as a staff, we've been working really hard to try and solidify and build partnerships and figure out what those partnerships might look like with all of the landowners and the neighbors. We've conducted a physical site survey. We've been working with traffic engineers. We're checking into water rights options, how we'll get utilities to the sites, and one of our biggest issues is topsoil in Missoula. The specific plan that we'll be going through is to get to phased development. How do we bite this off so that we can afford it as a community? What other resources are out there that we might be able to take advantage of? Also tonight, we hope to learn from you what additional tasks we might need to get into. What else do we have to learn? What questions do we need to further research to move this project forward? Something that's really important to me, this has been a very, very lengthy process. And many of our park processes are, because few park projects are mandated. They're really initiated by citizens at grassroots level until they create enough of a groundswell that people want them to happen. So one of the things that we as staff have tried to do with each of our public process is honor the involvement of citizens of each prior process on the same project. And so what you're going to hear tonight is everything that we've done today involving citizens, along with our consultants, to try and address and present a project that you want. And we hope that you'll add to that so that we can continue to build this project and move it forward. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and get on with it.
4 when you're ready.
Okay. I'm Dan Hall with Western Cultural here in Missoula, and we've been working with Parks and Recreation on this project for 6 years now. And what we've been specifically struggling with over the last several years has been an update to the Fort Missoula Historic District nomination, and then an examination of some of the archaeology that's out here at the fort. And when we talk about the existing Fort Missoula National Register nomination, it was very well written. It truly is a gem. It was written in 1986. It has withstood the test of time. The buildings that are here are in very good shape. This really is a treasure that we have in our community. We're going to expand the district boundary by quite a bit. We're going to add a bunch of buildings that were not nominated in 1986, primarily because they weren't of age at that point in time. We're also including the historic landscape of Fort Missoula into the nomination. And the historic landscape is a recognition that there are things here at Fort Missoula that are part of the fabric, that are part of the history of the place, and that they should be recognized as well. So when we talk about how we're going to expand the National Register of Historic Places, some of it's just simple housekeeping. Things were classified differently 25 years ago. I'm sure that 25 years ago they'll have a different form that they'll use for classification. That's fine. And I can't repeat this enough. The resources here at Fort Missoula are in incredibly good shape. This is an example of what we talk about, resources that were not yet of 50 years of age. They were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, and there are all these garages all around the fort. But they were not of age at the time, and they applied a very strict 50-year deadline on these buildings. So they were not included in the district, and our nomination now does include them. And then there are other buildings that were probably mistakenly identified as their age, and these are underneath the water tower out here at the fort. And while they were clearly of age, in the initial research that was done, there were a couple that slipped through the crack, and these obviously are of age, and they're now part of the historic district. And then there are other structures that, back to the 50-year deadline, and that rigid application of 50 years, these two buildings were not of age to be included in the expansion of the district. And when I talk about the archaeology, there are a number of archaeological sites out here at Fort Missoula that have never been really considered for the National Register, and that's one of the things that we need to examine now. 26 years ago, my specialty of historical archaeology didn't even exist. We now know that there are historic artifacts in the ground out here at Fort Missoula. They've been hit pretty hard by guys that are metal detecting, but for the most part, there's still quite a bit of information here. This is a site that Dr. Carling Maloof had excavated for almost 20 years out here on the banks of the river. And it had never been formally recorded and noted as part of the district, and so that's part of the general housekeeping that we were doing in the expansion of the district. And when I talk about the archaeology, this is one of the sites that we excavated last summer, the original Fort Bakery. With the image over here on the side is magnetic data, and it's just basically a very sensitive metal detector, and it's looking at the ground. And what you're seeing there with that big red blob is where the fire hearth stood from the bakery. And that fire burned so hot and for so long that it actually magnetized the soils. And so we were able to hone in on that log structure and then place our excavation units that you can see on the left there. We were able to learn that the post baker lived in the front of the building, and he had cups and plates and utensils that he bought from merchants in Missoula. He was not using military accoutrements in his dining facility, if you will. The bakery then was to the back, where the bread was actually made and then put in the ovens. And when we look at the physical structure of the bakery itself, it's very similar to the bakeries that were Fort Laramie, which was a military installation at the same time period. This is one of the sites that we're recommending to the design people be included in the interpretation efforts for the park. In our investigation, we came across a historic trash scatter. This is one of those resources where the only people who knew about it were the guys with the metal detectors. They had been working it pretty hard. We went in and just removed the top 30 centimeters of the site. And that's to ensure that during the construction of the park that there's no damage to the trash deposit itself. And to this day, my crew is still really irritated with me because it just started to get good when we hit that 30-meter horizon and we had to stop digging. We do know that it dates from the 1880s, and there's ceramic there, and there's metal, and there's glass. There are military cartridges and casings. There's a whole host of things out there. And don't get me wrong, I'd love to dig this, but the reality is the cost constraints of going out there and excavating that would be just astronomical. This is another one of the sites that we had excavated and that we had recommended to the designers for interpretive efforts. And again, with the magnetic data on the side. And we use this to hone in on buildings because we've learned over the years that back doors, front doors, and windows of historic buildings are really good places to find the goodies. And what we did here on the back of the CCC warehouse, which stood out here, was we honed in on the doors and the windows. And all of these treasure trove of artifacts started to appear out of the ground. And it's true for most historic sites. We learn things that the historic record doesn't tell us. And for example, we found a couple of crushed tequila bottles. Well, this is supposedly a dry installation that the military was running. Well, obviously it wasn't. We also found a couple of lipstick containers. And when we went and looked at the historic record, there were no women that were working in shipping and receiving in the CCC complex that was here. They were in other offices, but they were not in the warehouse district. And so obviously there's something going on here that the historic record isn't telling us about. This is one of the reasons that we're here tonight, is CCC Road, our Guardsman Lane, and we had recommended that this be considered a contributing resource to the National Register of Historic Places for its association with the Civilian Conservation Corps. And the park design is going to have an impact, if you will, on the road. And the road alignment is, it has implications for the design, for traffic safety, and all these things. I'll let these guys walk you through that. But since it's a contributing resource, that means that a mitigation effort must occur. And mitigation has very specific meaning in historic preservation. And when Philip Makeling and I sat down and developed a mitigation plan, one of the things that we had discussed was this idea of going to the public and saying, what do you think we should do for the CCC road? We want to see something that evokes the sense of the Civilian Conservation Corps at Fort Missoula, but we think that there should be a public response to this. And I talked with some of the historians and archaeologists over at the Montana Department of Transportation. They are the ones who deal more with historic roads than anybody in the state. And their standard response is to put up a sign. And you've all seen them as you're driving around Montana, the big brown signs. Something used to stand here. While I think interpretation and signage is good, I would like to try something different. And so that's what we're trying to do tonight. And these guys have an example of what they think would be an appropriate way to try and mitigate the road. And I would caution you tonight when you're thinking about this and writing your thoughts down or discussing this in your groups to go wild. And I know that makes Donna very nervous for the budget implications, but this is something new and it's something different. And I would like to see what comes about tonight as a result of this. And then again, back to the National Register District, some of it's just simple house cleaning. Back in 1986, they counted things differently than we count things now, and it's just a simple fact that, in 50 years, we'll be doing things differently than we are now. The last thing I want to talk about tonight is the landscape. And the historic landscape here at Fort Missoula is a contributing resource to the district, and it is incredibly compelling. The fort was put here at this very location for several specific reasons. Obviously, they needed access to the river. They needed water. Secondly, at this point in time, as you can see, Missoula is 5 miles away. This is an open design, and the military used this at military installations all across the West. This Hollywood myth about the stockades just really wasn't true. And what this open design does is it allows for the military to be able to observe who's coming and going, and it also allows for an active patrolling force that's coming and going from the fort. And we still see elements of that open design here at Fort Missoula today. What you see in the landscape is that each successive historic period then subsequently modifies the historic landscape. When Fort Missoula was rebuilt in 1904 to 1912, the military introduced this concept of the City Beautiful movement. And there was this idea that if we humanized the public environment, that it would instill a sense of public pride or civic pride in our public places. And so there were a number of tricks that landscape architects employed to try and humanize the environment. And if you look at Fort Missoula into the original design, it's a square around a square parade grounds. In 1904, we moved to a parade grounds that's curved. We've got curved roads. We introduced vegetation. We introduced sidewalks, decorative lamp posts, all the wide streets. There are some of these sidewalks out here that are original. When you look at them, you stop and you think, why is this thing so wide? That's all back to the City Beautiful movement. And here's Officers Row, and again, all of the landscape elements that we talked about. In the front there, they had raised flower beds. The post hospital. And the idea in the landscaping was that the board sidewalks would demark the boundary between the built environment and the unbuilt environment. And you can see this perfectly here at the post hospital. And again, back to Officers Row with the decorative street lamps. We're seeing the low wrought iron fences. The only one that's left today out of Fort Missoula is around the cemetery. You see the trees that have been planted here in 1931. But note, obviously enough, that they're on one side of the street but not on the parade grounds. It's not until we get the presence of the Civilian Conservation Corps that we get to the last period of the landscape, and that's the Civilian Conservation Corps. And they did what the CCC did all across the West. They planted trees. And when you look at this urban forest that's out here at Fort Missoula, the Civilian Conservation Corps did that. Now, the trees that line the original Fort Missoula Road were put on the National Register during the original nomination, and then they stopped. They didn't include all of the trees that are here, and we've hopefully corrected that situation because that is an important part of the landscape. It does have a reflection on the history of the place, if you will. And I realize I'm probably skipping out a lot of things, but the reality is this has been 6 years in the making, and I've got about 20 minutes to talk about it. And I love to talk about Fort Missoula, don't get me wrong. It's a fascinating place. But we do need to move this forward tonight, and so I'll turn this over now to Bill.
Dan, I think we might have time for some questions, if there's any questions for anybody.
Yeah, with the third or fourth slide, you had the National Historic Boundary, you were proposing to expand it.
Yeah.
So what elements are there that are driving that?
Primarily the landscape. When you go back to the larger issue, and that is looking at the original open design, and then looking at the elements of the City Beautiful movement, and then looking at the landscape that the Civilian Conservation Corps did. And that's the driving force behind this much, much larger boundary. And there have been questions about where we placed the boundary, why we did, and there are a number of guidelines that we use in choosing boundaries. Excuse me, but at the end of the day, it's about the resource. And I'm not too concerned with who owns the property. I'm more concerned with the historic landscape is here, and we need to get in the district.
And what sort of implications does that have for the park?
It has tremendous implications in the design process. And that's one of the things that these guys did an amazing job. I prepared a report at the end of this process and turned it over to these guys. And I said, the first thing is that the park design needs to be influenced by the Civilian Conservation Corps. This side of Fort Missoula has more CCC influence than any other part of the fort. And there's a natural relationship between parks and the Civilian Conservation Corps. When I broached this idea to Donna, she'd already been thinking about that for years. It's a natural fit. When we talk about the landscape, specific examples are, this morning there were conversations about the rugby field and the complex and a children's playground. And the reality is that introducing that playground in that specific location would be intrusive into the landscape elements that surround the military cemetery. And those are the City Beautiful elements that are out there at the cemetery. And so it would be more appropriate just to flip that over to the other side of the field like we were talking about this morning. So it does have implications for the park design. And I'm really impressed with what these guys have done in taking those considerations and really running with them. Because there's so much of the park design here that incorporates the historic fabric and the resources and protects that landscape and actually, if you will, promotes it.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the historical cultural resources?
I have a quick question. What's the time frame? What's the status now of the new application? Is
submitted or?
It has been submitted. The State Historic Preservation Office has it, and their review board is meeting Friday to discuss that. And I'm not quite sure of the procedure after that. Phil Makeling is here, might be able to answer that question better.
Yeah, I've been to a few review board meetings, and they've had this nomination now to read for about 6 weeks. And so they will have questions about it, and Dan and I will both be there. I don't think others will be there, but to try to answer those questions. And then their next step is either to recommend certain changes, either to the boundary or to the text, or changes in concept or things, additional tasks that may not have been covered, or they can recommend that it be sent forward to the keeper of the National Register of Historic Places. And then the keeper waits to hear from private property owners who may have objections to being designated within the historic district boundary. And if those private property owners, for example, if more than 50% of the land has private property owners' objections, then the keeper will wait until those objections are resolved somehow. Or the keeper will send it back for revisions, as in the case of one of the districts we've been working on, or the keeper will simply approve it, accept it, and it'll be listed in the National Register. It's not a regulatory thing, though. Essentially, it's a voluntary designation. There's no rules that come with it, unless there are federal funds available, federal permits, or something like that. And one of the reasons that we're doing this is in anticipation that there will be needed federal permits and that there will be needed federal funds to pay for this. And so it had to be done sometime. It made sense to do it first and have it actually, because of the nature of the place, have it actually shape and inform the design of the park. So I think it's a really good fit.
Any other questions for Dan?
Yep.
My name is Bill Newman. I'm with DHM Design, and I'm a parks planner. And we've been working in partnership with WGM Group here in Missoula over the last 5 months to take the park master plan, the conceptual plan, and develop the design details. And what I'd like to show you tonight is the layout and the character, what the park would look like, and then discuss. We've come up with an idea that we want to share with you about how we might interpret the historic alignment of the road that Dan had mentioned. And I'll show you several sketches that we've done for that. First, we want to go back to the guiding principles. You've gone through a long community process, and back when the master plan report was done in 2001, there were several guidelines that were established. One is the concept of the regional park. What is that? We want to provide, or the community had identified that they wanted to provide multiple uses that attract users not only from Missoula but from the county and state, a larger audience or user group. And you wanted to strive to balance the many interests and needs of those people and provide a mix of both developed and undeveloped park areas. Also at that time, the steering committee for the project had made several assumptions. One was that the park would be developed in phases, and that they wanted to recognize the limited space with the multiple demands, so a lot of different user groups. So we want to provide shared facilities as much as possible. I won't go through the entire list, but these are things that were considered. We want to provide accessibility and provide restrooms, parking, concession, storage, and maintenance facilities. It needs to be a self-sustaining facility. Then, as part of the community work, there was a working group list of principles that was developed. We want to acknowledge, preserve, and enhance the unique historic values, and Dan discussed many of those tonight. So that's a big part of the design process that we've considered as we've developed the design details for the park. We want to again encompass the diverse activities and serve people of all abilities, ages, and income groups. It's a large large group of users that we need to accommodate. We want to be sensitive to the environment as well as to the historic attributes of the site. We want to also maintain the natural vistas and views. You've got fantastic open views. Provide adequate infrastructure, utilities, grading, drainage, and promote use of the facility with signage. We want to try to work with the entire shareholders group of the fort and make sure there's consistent signage and direction within the site. And then we want to be sensitive to our surrounding neighbors. Back in April of just this year, we had a stakeholders meeting group. And some of the things we discussed that were important was providing a safe entry into the park, a safe road connection from South Avenue. Also, what was important to the group was to maintain the alignment of Guardsman Lane as it approaches the museum. We wanted to hold that point, and I'll show you that illustration in a minute. Also, to consider was important was that we wanted to provide a narrow, meandering road to slow traffic. Right now, the traffic moves fairly rapidly through the site, and we want to try to slow that down and make it a better park experience, because we're going to be introducing a lot of people to the park site. We need to make that a safe environment. One of the other goals was to stay clear of the trash scatter and a non-disclosure of that site. So that's the trash scatter sites that Dan had discussed in his presentation. So you'll see how we've respected those sites and have not disturbed those areas. We want to provide sports facilities to host tournaments at home. A lot of your tournaments are out of town because you don't have the facilities locally here. So that's part of our goal in designing these facilities. I won't go through each item, but those were kind of the highlights of our discussion several months ago. And then as Dan discussed, there are several really significant historical periods of the fort, and we want to incorporate park theming based upon the Civilian Conservation Corps. And the fort served as a training, supply, and administration center for the Rocky Mountain region. So many of the CCC workers were mobilized from Fort Missoula. They worked at Yellowstone and Glacier National Parks. So it's just a wonderful fit to base our theming upon that. The other thing Dan discussed, we want to maintain those historic open landscape views. We also want to maintain a buffer zone around the post cemetery. This morning we had a meeting and we decided to move a few things to respect that zone around the post cemetery. And then we want any architecture that we propose to be compatible with your existing historic facilities. So we want to have that CCC appearance. And then we want to avoid introducing traffic impacts at Officers Road. So that's part of the traffic and layout of the roadway discussion that we had. We want to be sensitive about not introducing more traffic than we have. You've got a great, variety of materials that exist on the site, from the decorative fencing that Dan talked about to a lot of the log structures. Just a real great palette of materials to consider when designing the park. So this is the proposed layout. This is based upon your existing master plan, and what we've done is basically gone in and detailed, provided layout and grading, and tried to put the pieces together. South Avenue across the top here. We're proposing an access point at 33rd Avenue here. The existing access point comes in at the diagonal at this location. So we're proposing an entry feature to the park at this location, actually to the whole fort site right here. The road would come through here, curve around, and then reconnect with the existing road alignment, Guardsman Lane, right at this point. And then this would be the arrival down at the museum. We have 11 full-size athletic fields. It's shown in the darker green. This is a premier rugby pitch area with restroom, storage, bleachers, and then we're going to move the playground down to this area. There would be parking associated with the rugby pitch area that could also be shared with the cemetery that sits right here. The road then comes down to this parking area, and this is what we're calling kind of a central picnic pavilion area, and I'll show you some nice details for that. And then off of that would be a championship soccer field, which we're considering maybe artificial turf that would extend your soccer season. It would have parking in this location. And then another idea we've come up with is we've been discussing with the university the extension of 36th Avenue here and some shared parking. And Brent will talk about the road access in just a second. But that's kind of an overview of the park. This is an open play area here. So kind of non-programmed fields that you could play on. Here's kind of a blow-up view of the park site. So you can kind of start to see the full-size athletic fields. And these are the contours that go around the bowl. So the fields are set at a lower level as you kind of see them today. And then I'm going to have Brent jump in here. This is a photo taken from right about here, looking across the excavation. This is 33rd Avenue right here, and this is the school location. So Brent's going to kind of talk about the reasons, we came up with the studies we've done and the reasons why we've selected that location for the access into the site.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Talking about traffic is never quite as fun or exciting as all this other historical stuff, which really is interesting. But traffic is important because it's a public safety issue. And so we looked at 3 different options. We heard from the public that there were some important issues related to traffic in the fort. One is obviously the historic context of the road and just the environment that we're working in that cultural environment. And so we looked at preserving this road as one of the options. We also looked at an option where we bring the road up to intersect South Avenue on the property line right here and then follow the Fort Road. And then we looked at this option, which sort of came out of discussions with the City Public Works Department and our analysis of the impacts of that road on South Avenue. What we did was we did a little traffic study that predicted the amount of traffic that we would be generating by this park facility when traffic is at its peak on South Avenue. And so we want to understand and design for safety of access of people getting on and off South Avenue. We looked at what we would need to do to preserve this existing alignment and intersect at 31st Street where the existing intersection is. This is a very high skew angle, and it's about 45 degrees, I would guess. We want that to be close to 90 so that we can have good sight distance back for cars entering at that location. This was designed, I think, probably, before cars were really very prevalent use, and it just doesn't fit modern intersection design. So what we would have to do is we'd have to realign the road and button hook it to come in right here. We also looked at the traffic volumes that we'd be generating, and the number of left turns into the park would warrant a left turn pocket on South Avenue. What that entails is building rebuilding about 500 feet of South Avenue on each side of this intersection, so 1,000 feet total of South Avenue to provide that left turn pocket. There's sort of one here now, but what that entails is widening the road, buying more right-of-way, and moving the trail that's there out so that we can accommodate this left turn pocket. And that becomes a very expensive option. The realignment here causes some impacts to this property and additional right-of-way costs. We also looked at an option of putting a roundabout there.
roundabouts are a unique facility because they accommodate the left turns in the intersection rather than building all this left turn pocket. And then they also serve as kind of a traffic signal, or a similar function as a traffic signal, is that they let traffic on and off of the street. And they allow you to keep your street 2 lanes rather than widening it to a 3-lane. So we looked at that option there as well. In this option, when we started to look at the construction of the left turn pocket, coming back here 500 feet, coming here 500 feet, the tapers start to overlap with these adjacent intersections. And because there are left turn pockets here and the potential future left turn pocket here for traffic going this way, and well, there wouldn't be anything there, but here, then you start to look at a left turn pocket that goes from about here all the way down here, and that becomes very expensive, and you're relining the trail as well. You also end up with a very undesirable left turn overlap. The cars are coming in here, they're getting in the left turn lane to turn in here, and they're competing with cars that are in the left turn lane for this. And that overlap is something that we really avoid as transportation engineers. It's a potential crash location. When we started looking at this intersection as a connection point to 33rd Avenue, which connects to the regional parks to the north, and if we were going to do a roundabout and avoid 3-laning South Avenue, that provides a good facility for that side of the road as well as this side of the road. It's a collector street. It's appropriate to have a roundabout at a collector street with an intersection in the arterial. So we like and are recommending the roundabout as something that we should plan for in the long term. It allows us to keep South Avenue as a 2-lane, and it doesn't divide the neighborhood from the park. Then it's easier for pedestrians to cross. It's also less expensive, we think, because it really confines the improvements to that one location. And it provides a lot of utility. You would never have to signalize this. It would be in lieu of a signal. It is a situation that we would want to do further studies when we got very close to construction, because we want to deal with the most recent traffic volumes and design standards for roundabouts. We're designing a couple of these right now, and the standards are evolving somewhat. So that's our recommendation, coming down and then connecting to the historic road right there. So any questions on that?
Yeah, I have some questions. I think that we need to be aware that 33rd Street is more than a collector street. It has the potential to become an arterial because it turns into Tower Street, and Tower goes all the way to Spurgeon, 7th and 3rd. And so there's a potential for large volume traffic to be using that arterial, become an arterial. To get off of Reserve Street, they'll come down here and they'll take 33rd to Tower. And so you're going to have an impact at Tower and Spurgeon. That's already a problem. And then you're going to have another impact at Tower and 7th and Tower and 3rd. And right now, there's no bike lanes on any of that stretch of Tower Street and 33rd Street. The other thing that's happening off of 33rd, which becomes Tower, is behind the high school. They're almost finished building the new Western Montana Veterans Cemetery, which is a huge facility. It's beautiful. But there's also potential impact between, here's the scenario that I kind of dread. It's like Memorial Day weekend, and they're having state soccer or state track championships at the high school field. So that whole North Avenue is covered with school buses and people at the track at the high school. Then we've got the premier soccer or rugby event going on here at the soccer fields, and the veterans are having a parade to go to their cemetery. So I like the idea of the roundabout there, but we need to pay attention to the impacts that are going to be created on that stretch of road, 33rd, which becomes Tower, and the impact on the other intersections as you go north from there, Spurgeon, 7th.
Well, those are really good points. We like the connectivity from the recreational point of view because of the parks, because of the Veterans Cemetery, and connecting that to the historic Fort Cemetery here as well. So that connection can be a positive for bikes and pedestrians as well, from just linking these recreational corridors. The other thing that
It can be positive, but there's no, right now, Tower Street is a disaster for bicyclists, especially for young people. There's no shoulder, there's a drop off, there's ditches there, kids are riding bikes down there, there's quite a bit of traffic there.
So that's a very good comment. The other thing that we've heard is the high school students cutting through here. We think that moving the access to this location will help discourage that somewhat, because their parking lots all enter out onto 33rd Street, and so this is certainly cut through the traffic. Fast and we want to exactly so that the only traffic here is just before Fort Missoula. That is the only destination, and it's the prominence of this great park system.
To create the destination, though, and so like now, 3rd and Reserve and 3rd Street, when they get down, digging it up, there's quite a bit of traffic from down 3rd Street from Reserve to Tower. And because then at Tower and Spurgeon, you have the ball fields. And that's a pretty awkward intersection there because there's no curbs, there's no bike path, there's just ditches. And people are riding bikes back.
I captured your comment up here just so we wouldn't lose it. And then also in the public involvement portion of the meeting, you'll also have an opportunity in one of these questions to address those kinds of concerns. So bring it up again during that portion of the meeting too.
Let me run through some quick images that we have, and then we can keep things moving along. These are just some 3D sketches that we've done. This is a view if you're standing here looking back towards the entry. It shows the road, and we have a divided median here. Here's the trail that runs alongside the road. This is the rugby area. If you were standing out on South Avenue by the high school looking back into the park, here's kind of the entry monument we're talking about. The road coming in, swinging around. This is the soccer complex and the rugby. And then if you're down here at this picnic pavilion area, a lot of these are existing trees. We're trying to congregate all the architectural elements together so we're not scattering things all over the site. This is what we wanted to point out as part of our interpretation of the road. The road currently does this. We're going to break it off here and follow this new alignment. And what we want to do is provide, just as a suggestion of our idea, we think that when we get into here, it would be great to extend that double row of trees and run the trail through here. So visually, it'll always kind of memorialize what that historic alignment looked like, rather than putting up the sign that Dan discussed. Here's another great view of that on the lower right. The existing road, we follow that to right there, and then it breaks off to the new intersection. But here's our double row of trees, and the trail follows that alignment. So it's there, it's just changed uses. That's kind of a close-up view. You can kind of see the people back on the trail there. And then so that was our idea for how we might deal with the road. I want to just run through some quick character sketches on what the theming of the park might look like. This is the picnic pavilion area. We've got large shelters in the center here with smaller shelters, restrooms, storage. This is a picnic overlook that overlooks the soccer fields here.
I'm sorry, would you please point out where the museum would be in relationship to that? Is it south?
The museum is down,
South and
by
west?
down on the
Okay.
floor.
Okay,
I'll go back to the master planning and show you.
all right.
This morning we talked about, we're thinking we're going to probably move this playground area over to here. But, it's a nice little complex with the parking and access off of the parking into the park and facilities here. And then the character of those structures might look something like this. Some of the CCC architecture that was built. And here are some different views in our 3D model, looking at the large pavilion here. We'd like to use stone, and maybe there's a fireplace in this larger structure. Some nice woodwork. So we think the architecture is important. It needs to be compatible with the site. Here's kind of another view looking down on the picnic area. Here's the soccer complex, multi-use fields, I should say, in the background. There's kind of a close-up view, so you can have hundreds of tables under there for large events, and you can move the tables out. And, maybe it's used for ice skating or other different events. It'd be a really great space. These are just some of the restroom structures that we looked at. You can customize them. And we would have some small storage concession buildings, but we would want them all to kind of tie together. Play equipment. We want to certainly provide for the younger park users. Here's the
Thanks.
museum.
Yes.
Here's the military museum here. So we're basically this is the existing group of trees here. So we're congregating the landscape and structures here, and we're maintaining the open view through here and through here. So we want to try to preserve that. And then this is what the artificial turf field might look like. We would need to provide some lights. So we would do something that's not intrusive. We want black poles. We want non-glare. It would be full cutoff, so the light would stay within that rectangle. We would probably have lit pathways from the parking lot down to this area because it would have extended use. And then these are just some character shots of the walkways. We have walkways that run through the site. And then this plane, just kind of the red lines indicate the trails. We've got great connectivity with the regional trail along South Avenue. This is a 1.5 mile loop that runs around the perimeter of the whole 83 acres. This is a 1/2 mile loop that runs around the open play area. We've got connections into all of the great trails that run around the museum and the gardens here. We've got access to the county parks here, and we've got a connection here that ties into Officers Row. In the future, we can connect to the river, and so that we've considered all of those details. These are actual historic sketches of what the CCC had built into the national parks. So it gives you a flavor of what the monuments might look like in the signage. Large timbers and rocks. And maybe we do some of kind of the historical benches. Maybe we set those out in the foreground of the picnic pavilion area. We want to use light fixtures that are also in character with the CCC. We don't want to use something modern. We want it all to tie together. These are just some quick aerial shots. So we're, I believe, right here tonight. Here's Officers Row. Here's the open space we talked about, the picnic pavilion, and the new access road coming in here. And then here's the double row of trees with the trail along that location. And I'll just flip through some of these. So you see, we maintain a pretty nice open landscape. And I'll leave it on that one right there. I'm showing our our suggestion of how we might deal with the roadway.
Great job.
Thank you.
Because I know what the budget for this was, and it's amazing what you've done with that budget. I'm with the soccer folks, and I didn't see, the rugby guys got some storage in a little special clubhouse. Where's the soccer clubhouse? Is there any special storage or gathering area for the soccer complex at all?
There's storage. What we'd like to do is combine that with concessions or restrooms, and there is storage for the soccer.
Great.
Yes.
And then the other, I like the fact that you moved the playground away from maybe the championship field to the other side of the pavilion.
Yes.
Unless you want to fence off those kids from running onto the field.
We want to make it more visible from more of the park. We want the playground to be visible for parents to see their kids.
Great. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So, near the championship field that you're looking at,
Yes.
is there an area that you have designated for award presentation or speech making or any such sort of elevated ground for that?
You know, there are several opportunities, and let me see if I can flip to a better slide here to show you. That's not the best one right there. Put on the slide. Hit the slideshow. There you go. Perfect. Just like that. You know, you've got large plaza areas, like a promenade here with this picnic overlook. You could do presentations, you know, at this location would be great. And there are areas around that artificial championship field. If you want to be up here kind of on an overlook. I'm sorry, did that answer your...
Well, I guess, when you think, like the veterans or whatever else might come in there other than just, awards for a match, but, there gets quite a crowd for some of that, and, if that's accommodated without having all the obstructed view is a good idea as well.
Sure, absolutely.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Let's thank all our presenters for their presentations, but all their hard work and pulling everybody's ideas together. How many of you plan on staying for the open discussion part of the next? So I'm trying to coordinate numbers here.
We want you all to stay. We need your
Yes, we
input.
want everybody to stay, and we'll try to make it as quick as possible. If you are not staying and you have comments or concerns, please fill out the back of the form and leave them in the back of the room. And if you are going to stay for the open roundtable discussion, and we'll be addressing the questions on the bottom of page 1 on the agenda, please stay, and we'll work within probably this front part here. So if you're going to stay, come forward, and we'll set up probably 2 tables. I counted about 12 extra people other than the presenters, so come on down. To not only be our recorder, but be our spokesperson on what we agreed to and discussed during this last roundtable.
Okay, so if I miss anything, if I miss anything or throw a word that's not appropriate, let me know. If I misspelled something, I won't notice, so don't worry about it. So we started on looking at Guardsman Lane, and generally, just off the bat, people said they support DHM's plan and their interpretation of Guardsman Lane with having part of the access road stay on the original alignment and part of the original alignment be have a trail built on the alignment. Let's see. There was a comment that there should be treatments to the road and to the trail that should easily and quickly delineate trail versus road, so there isn't confusion between users and having vehicles accidentally driving on the trail. I'm going to jump down here because this still deals with Guardsman Lane. We want to suggestion of creating a cemetery walk along or near the Guardsman Lane road that could be accommodated with signage, keep it well maintained. You could move the trail a little bit closer to the road to kind of maximize the open area out in that space while still leaving a vegetative buffer between the road and the trail. Jumping up here to the new road, one suggestion was to make more a bold pedestrian crossing, or create a pedestrian crossing, I'm sorry, at, it's hard to describe where the area is. It's where the two trails kind of come together in the road, on the turn where the road enters the alignment of the old CCC road there. Make a designated pedestrian crossing. Okay, there were comments about traffic calming within the site. Make well-marked crossings throughout the site so that pedestrians can get across the CCC road safely and easily. They like the ideas of having divided lanes and medians for easier pedestrian crossings. People felt like the design does discourage cut-through traffic and efficiently deals with the issues that are there. Sorry. Let's see. Suggested street layout addresses cut-through traffic, so I think we're there. Will parking stay at existing locations on South? Okay, so this was a question about the parking that's at the county park space, and will that parking stay on South Avenue? The answer is yes. So for this phase, because this phase of development doesn't address that part of the park. Will parking accommodate RVs? And I believe that went over to our bin, so that will be answered later. Suggestion to create a gate at the cemetery roundabout area to control traffic through there. Guardsmen, let's see, and then some ideas for naming. We could retain the historic CCC road name for the vehicular access off of, correct me if I'm wrong, off of 32nd? Is that right? 33rd, where the roundabout is?
33rd.
33rd, that could be CCC Road, and then Guardsman Lane could be the name for the vehicular access to the cemetery or to the trail section that passes through the double line of trees. And from our discussion, that second idea seemed to be favored above the first. Okay. Parking by the rugby and soccer areas, suggestion that they need to accommodate large buses for tournaments when schools are coming through, possible turnaround space for those buses, or buses could come into those parking lots, drop folks off, and then park in the larger parking lot, that's that shared parking lot by the university property. The roundabout on, there was a suggestion to put a roundabout on 36th as well as the one on 33rd. That would slow down traffic, help with crossing on South, it would improve access between the park and the neighborhoods to the north. It would also help those neighborhoods access the trail that's on the south side of South Avenue. And of course, that would be a route for school kids to get down to school. That's down off of 40th Avenue, I believe. The suggestion to improve pedestrian crossings at all of the roads that connect to the neighborhoods to the north. Median refuge areas might be able to accommodate that, and I believe we'll explore that more as we move forward. And then suggestion to do a speed study on South Avenue to help inform the comment above. Okay, people seem to generally like the theming of the CCC era. That was good, everybody was nodding their heads on that. Their comment that there are good links between the historic, the new road alignment, that's what we were getting at there, that the new road alignment with the roundabout on 33rd enhances the link between the historic district and the new Veterans Cemetery that's to the north, as well as to the school and the other grounds that are up there. And That we could potentially use the centers of the roundabouts as memorial or monument opportunities. Let's see, there's a couple more. Okay, for lights at the soccer pitch, we'd like lights to comply with dark skies ordinance and principles. There's comment that the impacts of the lights would probably be minimal or minor to the neighborhood. They would be very helpful in the winter because it gets dark so early, but would like to have lights limited to the premier field so we're not lighting up the whole park. Don't let parking lots serve as drive-through traffic ways, so we can address that through design and traffic calming.
Good job.
Thanks.
And then in the earlier discussion, we had some bin items that will be incorporated with this as well, and they include the concern about the Tower Street particularly and the impacts of all that traffic coming through and no bike paths. Soccer storage was another one that was raised, presentation podiums, and then overnight parking of RVs that we've already heard from here. So, and we've asked Bill and Dan to just give a quick review of what they've heard tonight and any key points that we need to hear from them, and then we'll wrap it up.
I think Dave's well described the thoughts. I think everybody had some fantastic ideas, and we'd like to try to incorporate those into the plan.
I'm encouraged, and I think my next step is to send a letter report to the State Historic Preservation Office and tell them that their idea worked, and that this is something that they need to consider in other projects in the future, because this obviously I think it's not only a good idea, and I'll admit I was skeptical at first. I'm a believer now.
I believe. And Donna, will you let us know what happens next?
Yes. First I want to thank everybody, because I know you gave up a beautiful evening to be here and share this with us. Appreciate the ideas. And I also want to thank Northern Rockies Heritage Center again, because they hosted this site, and it's a beautiful facility. What will happen next is we continue to do all the research for any of the questions that still remain, and there's still some around utilities and soil and all those kinds of things. But what we'll do is we'll post Dan's presentation on the cultural resources, and then Bill and Mark's presentation on the park design, and we'll post the presentation I gave you so you have a little bit of history on our website. We may make a few changes based on comments that we heard throughout today before we post those, so give us at least a week to 10 days or so. It is the 4th of July weekend coming up, so we're a little busy outdoors this time of year. We'll get those posted, and then what we're going to do, based on what we heard throughout the day, is we're asking Western Cultural and DHM, WGM to basically go full blast ahead, because you gave us some good ideas, tweak some things, but I think we have a plan that the community is accepting, and what we're able to do next, that means, is go to more design detail, go to how do we cost this out, how do we phase it, what options are there, and we hope to have that all coming together in late August, early September. In September, we'll probably, I'm just guessing that City Council will want to have a full-blown public hearing, even though it's not required for a process like this. But because this park has such significance to our community, I'm guessing they'll want to do it anyway. So we'll keep you posted as we go. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.